Have you ever stopped to think about what could make Jesus feel disgust, not frustration, not disappointment, but an intense repulsion that he even says he's about to vomit? Believe it or not, this happened. And it wasn't with declared sinners, it wasn't with false prophets, nor with those who persecute the gospel. It was with a church that thought everything was fine. In the book of Revelation, Jesus sent letters to 7 churches. Some were praised for their faithfulness. Others were warned for tolerating heresies and grave sins. But only one received such a devastating diagnosis that not a single word of encouragement was given. Here are his words. Because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I am about to vomit you out of my mouth. Revelation 3:16. Think about that. A church that made Jesus want to expel it from his own body. But why? They didn't worship idols. They weren't facing persecution. They weren't promoting heretical doctrines. So what made them worse than all the others? Self-sufficiency. They were so comfortable, so satisfied with what they had, that they didn't realize they were spiritually bankrupt. In the eyes of Jesus, they were wretched, pitiful, poor, blind, and naked. Revelation 3:17. And here's the scariest part. Many believe that this letter wasn't written just for that church, but as a prophetic warning for our generation. A generation where churches have wealth, influence, millions of followers, but no life of prayer, no hunger for God's presence, no real fire burning inside them. What if this letter is for us? What if Jesus is standing outside many churches today, knocking on the door, waiting to be invited in? What follows will change your view on what it means to be lukewarm. Because being lukewarm is not what most people think. And the question you need to ask now is, would Jesus look at my faith and say, I make him want to vomit? But before showing how to escape this terrible condition, Jesus does something no one expected. He exposes the root of the problem in Laodicea and, as a result, in many of us today. He says, you say, I am rich, I have acquired wealth, and do not need a thing. But you do not realize that you are wretched, pitiful, poor, blind, and naked. Revelation 3:17. This is the true danger of spiritual lukewarmness. It's not just being distant from God, it's thinking you're close when in fact you're on the edge of the abyss. And think carefully. This message was written to a church. It wasn't for unbelievers or pagans. It was for people who thought they were safe. Does this remind you of anything? How many of us today confuse blessing with money, confuse success with divine acceptance? How many churches measure their spirituality by the size of their building, by the number of followers on social media, by packed events? But Jesus doesn't look at numbers. He looks at the heart. And for the church of Laodicea, he found nothing but spiritual emptiness covered by false security. And the worst part, they didn't see it. What if the same is happening with us? If Jesus were to write a letter to your church, to your life today, what would he say? Would he see a heart burning for his presence, or a life so comfortable it became useless? But here comes the most surprising part of this message. Even after saying he's about to vomit them out, Jesus doesn't abandon them. He doesn't destroy them. He doesn't turn his back. He does something no one expected. He offers a solution. He says, I counsel you to buy from me gold refined in the fire so you can become rich, and white clothes to wear so you can cover your shameful nakedness, and salve to put on your eyes so you can see. Revelation 3:18. Do you see what he's doing? He's taking exactly the things Laodicea prided itself on and showing that spiritually they meant nothing. They had gold, but they were poor. They had luxurious clothes, but they were naked. They had a famous eye medicine, but they were blind. And Jesus says, "Come to me, and I will give you everything that truly matters." Now, the question that needs to be asked, wasn't this letter written for us too? Are we trusting more in our achievements than in God's presence? Has our faith become something comfortable, without challenges, without fire, without real dependence on Christ? Because Jesus isn't looking for rich churches. He isn't looking for popular followers. He's not impressed by big events. He wants broken hearts. He wants people who depend on him as if their lives depended on it. And now comes the strongest moment of the letter. After everything he said, after exposing lukewarmness, after showing the danger, Jesus does something no one would expect from someone who just said, "I'm about to vomit you out." He extends an invitation. He says, "Here I am. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with that person and they with me." Revelation 3:20. Doesn't that give you chills? The church of Laodicea had shut Jesus out. They still gathered, still sang, still preached, but Jesus was no longer there. And now, he's standing outside, knocking, asking to come in. The very God, the one who holds the universe together, the one who could destroy everything with a word, is there, at the door, waiting. Can you imagine that? The scene is as absurd as it is painful. And then the great question arises. Is Jesus inside or outside your life? Is he inside or outside your church? Because if he's still on the outside, knocking, waiting, then there's only one thing to do. Open the door. And this is the great choice each of us must make. Will we continue living a lukewarm, comfortable, empty faith, or will we open the door and let him transform us? Because here's the most shocking truth of all. The destiny of Laodicea is not sealed. Jesus is still calling. He's still waiting. And now the decision is in our hands. If you felt that this message was for you, don't ignore this call, because the last thing you want to hear from Jesus is, "You make me want to vomit." But the best thing you could hear from him is, "Well done, good and faithful servant." So, which of these phrases do you want to hear? The answer is in your hands. Now tell me, will you open the door? But opening the door for Jesus is not just a symbolic act. It's not about repeating a prayer mechanically or feeling a passing emotion. Opening the door means allowing him to enter and take control of everything. It means surrendering completely, abandoning lukewarmness, and living a life of fire, of surrender, of total dependence. And this leads us to a fundamental question. What does it mean to be hot? What does it truly mean to be spiritually alive? Being hot is more than religious enthusiasm. It's more than attending services, singing praises, or knowing doctrine. Being hot is burning with love for Jesus to the point where you cannot live without him. See the difference. Lukewarmness is content with knowing about God, but the living fire seeks to know him intimately. Lukewarmness thinks it already has everything, but the living fire recognizes that without him, we are nothing. Lukewarmness trusts in its works, in its own strength, in its achievements, but the living fire trusts only in his grace and presence. And now, think about this. What if Jesus has already entered your life, but you haven't allowed him to take total control? What if you opened the door, but kept some areas closed to him? What if there are rooms in your heart that are still locked? Because here's a mistake many make. They let Jesus in, but they want him to stay only as a guest, not as the owner of the house. But Jesus doesn't want to be a visitor. He wants to be the Lord. And this means renouncing whatever keeps us from being completely His. It means leaving behind everything that makes us lukewarm. Maybe it's a hidden sin, a secret idolatry, a relationship that's pulling you away from God, a heart hardened by pride, a life of religious appearance but without true essence. Whatever it is, He's knocking and saying, "Let me in completely. Give me everything, not just part, but everything." And this is the great choice. Because the opposite of a hot life, full of God's presence, is not necessarily a cold and rebellious life. The opposite can be a lukewarm life, conformed, satisfied with little, but far from the true fire. And this is the tragedy of Laodicea. They weren't cold. They hadn't openly rejected God, but they weren't hot either. They weren't burning for Him. They were just in the middle. And that's what made Jesus say those strong words. Now, look at your life. Does your prayer have fire? Is your pursuit of God real? Is your faith full of life or just an empty routine? And if you realize that you're lukewarm, that your faith has cooled, that your passion has waned, know this: there is still hope. Because Jesus is still knocking. He is still calling. He is still waiting for you to open the door completely. The decision is yours. Will you stay lukewarm? Or will you open the door once and for all and let Him transform you completely? But now the decision is in your hands. You can ignore this call and keep living a lukewarm, safe, comfortable life. Or you can open the door, let Jesus in, and allow Him to completely transform your life. Because in the end, there is no middle ground. There is no partial faith. Either you are burning for Him or you are on the verge of being vomited out. And Jesus is still knocking. He is still calling. But for how much longer? The choice is yours. If this message has touched you, don't stop here. Our channel is full of content that will open your eyes and strengthen your faith. Watch our videos, subscribe, like, comment, and share this word with as many people as possible. Together, let's spread the fire of truth.